Let me just start. I'm going to introduce Dean Mills, and then she's going to take us from there. But Dean Mills, she joined the Macomb School of Business in 2006, and in the past 15 years, she's been a top-ranked researcher and nationally renowned and award-winning classroom educator. From 2011 to 2015, she served as the chair of the accounting department, and since 2014, she's held the Beverly H. and William P. O'Hara Chair in Business. She also practiced professionally with 2 national CPA firms from 81 to 89. Dean Mills, it's so much fun to be here with you, and let me turn the baton to you to start this great panel.
Thank you, Maynard. I am so pleased to be with the KBH Center for Energy, a joint arrangement of law and business and engineering. I am no longer in the classroom, but I know how to end the class on time. I understand this panel needs to end promptly by 3:20 so that we can get the wrap-up done by 3:30. So let me get started. I want to mention 2 student-centered initiatives before I introduce my fellow panelists. In a few weeks, KBH Center is bringing 15 energy students to Midland. They will meet with energy CEOs, participate in barbecue cook-off against competing universities, and conclude with a trek to a fracking site and a drilling rig. Please welcome them if you are part of our Midland community.
Be me.
And I also wanted to talk about Macomb's partnership with the Clements Center for National Security, because that's related to this panel. We now offer a minor in national security and international business. We started with about 10 students this fall, but have ambitions to grow it to 50 or 100 students, because, as this panel will discuss, students who want to be part of our future leaders in this area need courses in global value chains, international security, and global political economy. I'm really proud that we're partnering with the Clements Center for that. So let me get to introductions, and then I'm going to pose the first question or 2. Donald L. Evans, whom we honored last night, was appointed as the 34th U.S. Secretary of Commerce in 2001 by President George W. Bush, where he served until 2005. Don is a trusted friend and advisor for more than 3 decades. He worked on President Bush's successful gubernatorial campaigns in 94 and 98, and was chairman of the 2000 Bush-Cheney presidential campaign. Currently, Mr. Evans is chairman of the George W. Bush Foundation, a chairman of the Permian Strategic Partnership, a senior advisor at Energy Capital Partners. From 2007 to 2018, he was chairman of Energy Future Holdings Company, formerly TXU Energy. Before the Bush administration, for 15 years, Don was CEO of Tom Brown Inc., a large independent energy company. He attended UT Austin with both a BS in mechanical engineering and an MBA, and his passions for faith, family, and friends. Donna's wife, Penny, who I know is here this afternoon, have a family of 6 children, 7 grandchildren. They are part of our hosts in Midland, Texas. Admiral William H. McRaven is retired U.S. Navy 4-star admiral, and thank you for your service as Chancellor of the University of Texas System. His career included combat during Desert Storm, the Iraq and Afghanistan wars. The forces under his command were responsible for the capture of Saddam Hussein, the rescue of Captain Phillips, and the mission to get Osama bin Laden. As chairman of the UT system, he led one of the nation's largest, most respected systems of higher ed. He is recognized as a national authority on U.S. foreign policy and advised Presidents George W. Bush and Barack Obama and other leaders on defense issues. My colleague and friend Bobby Chesney was named Dean of our law school this past year. Bobby previously held the James A. Baker Chair in the Rule of Law and World Affairs and served the school's Associate Dean for Academic Affairs more than a decade. An award-winning instructor, Bobby Chesney has an array of innovative courses on cybersecurity, counterterrorism, national security, and teaching pre-Dean the traditional core classes of constitutional law, evidence, and civil procedure. Bobby is from San Antonio, where he is well-known and well-loved, earned a BS in political science and psychology from TCU before his JD from Harvard Law School. So let's get started. With a little bit of a history, the oil fields of East Texas helped win World War II by providing energy for the Allied forces. Currently, the Permian Basin in West Texas is a stabilizing force for energy supply, as evidenced by the 2019 drone attack in Saudi Arabia and that short-lived effect on oil prices. And we have now been able to impose sanctions on oil-producing countries without worrying about increased cost of energy at our own gas pumps at home. How does U.S. energy independence, which we are enjoying right now, influence our military choices and actions? And I think I'm posing that question to start to Admiral McRaven, but Don, I welcome your input too.
Yeah, well, thanks very much, Dean. And again, great to be here at the K. Bailey Hutchison Energy Center and being a part of this. You know, from the U.S. military standpoint, and I'm actually going to steal a little bit from Secretary Evans here. When we think about kind of hard power and soft power, the military has always been the application of the hard power, and that has served us incredibly well. Really since World War II. Our ability to power project, particularly for the U.S. Navy, as I think about it, you know, when you think about the first thing that a commander-in-chief is looking for when he is trying to make a statement, it is about where are the carrier battle groups and how do we project power. Our ability to move logistics around the world has to do with the availability of fuel for our ro-ro ships, for our logistics supply. But the hard power it becomes more and more difficult as you are having to deal with the nuances of international politics. This is where the soft power comes in. And I won't steal too much thunder because, again, this was, we were having this kind of conversation with Secretary Evans earlier, and when you think about the energy independence and our ability to use energy in a way that we haven't been able to in the past because of the Permian, because of our availability of both natural gas and other fossil fuels, it's a game changer for us.
Oh, you want me to
Did
add?
you want to follow up?
I'm
You're
glad
welcome to.
I mean, he said it well. I think I want to talk some about American leadership on this important issue, and I'm going to talk about hard power, soft power kind of leadership, where that can be, exactly what you got through talking about. But I want this audience to really understand the challenges that we have at this moment in time in the history of this nation and this world, and what this symposium is all about. And that challenge is energy transition around the world. I don't think that this country has ever faced this big a challenge. And you've felt some of it today in some of these discussions around the different kind of sources of energy and what have you that we think will be part of the mix in years ahead. But let me put it into perspective for you real quick. As Lil said, I mean, World War II, I think in part was won because of oil out of the East Texas fields. We like to say some out of the West Texas fields as well, as a matter of fact. But, and so at that point in time, we were producing 75% of the oil in the world in the United States of America. 25 years later, we had the oil embargo, the Yom Kippur War, and all of a sudden, the Middle East didn't like our position in that war, and so they shut down oil supply coming to the United States. From that point to today, or that point to 2012, we were energy scarce. So we went through 50 years of no soft power when it came to energy. We were energy scarce, and then all of a sudden, because of the state of Texas, because it all started right here, the energy renaissance started right here, we had a change it's been stunning how fast the change happened. It hadn't happened that fast before, where the strategic position of a country changed as fast as it did, when all of a sudden we went from being energy abundant to energy scarce. And from energy scarce to energy abundant, I mean. So, look, the point I really want to make, I picked up the paper this morning and I read about the weaponization of energy. China and Russia were talking about it, and the point was that Russia has this vast amount of oil and gas reserves. China has control of a vast number of the minerals, not only the minerals themselves, but the processing of the minerals. And so those two countries are talking about the weaponization of it. We look at it totally different. We look at energy as a source for good of the planet, to help make people's lives better. So I think America has got this amazing responsibility at this point in time to step up and accept this challenge, to come to a point where we can deliver affordable, reliable, and environmentally friendly energy to the entire world. There's a whole lot more to be said about it. I want to talk about a few of my conversations with Vladimir Putin along the way. But I just think I want everybody in the room to understand the magnitude of the challenge that we're facing right now. And we need to make sure that, when I saw that in the paper this morning, I said, we need to make sure that we're not politicizing the issue. We need to make sure that we're setting up on an issue a way we bring the right people together and talk about the challenges so that we can all come up with common solutions that work for the entire world.
Well, you talked about energy embargoes and loss of soft power. What lessons do you think we've learned that are useful? I'll call out Germany specifically, but elsewhere in the EU, as they took those nuclear power plants offline and are trying to get them back online. How quickly do you see that happening that could reduce their vulnerability to the loss of soft power?
Well, I would tell you kind of an interesting example about that. During the Cold War, the early part of it, Ronald Reagan was trying to put more economic pressure on Russia. And one of the big issues of the moment was the Siberian pipeline. And Russia was wanting to lay a Siberian pipeline into Europe. And Europe wanted it. President Reagan did not want it because he wanted to put the economic pressure on Russia. But you know what? At that point, we weren't energy abundant. We were energy scarce. We didn't have the soft power then that we have today. So that is an example of how it would have played into that negotiation, that discussion with our friends and colleagues in Eastern and Western Europe, for that matter. Fast forward 20 years later, in conversations I had with Vladimir Putin, talking about, I mentioned this last night, in 2005, he called me and wanted me to think about if I would consider being the chairman of Rosneft. And I said, no, thank you. But in that discussion, it was, we ought to have a contract between Russia and the U.S. You ought to contract with us to get your oil from us. And I said, no, thank you. I think what the U.S. ought to do is, you ought to ask you to put it out on the open market and let the market decide what the price should be. At the same time, he was talking to Gerhard Schroeder, who was the chancellor of Germany at the time, and they were talking about the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines, and Schroeder thought that would be a good idea. They built the pipeline. Schroeder went on the board of Gazprom, and those two pipelines just got blown up. And so there's a country that went from getting 55% of their gas from Russia. That's gone. There's a country that also was on nuclear and shut all of that down. And so now that's a country that does not have the economic environment to attract business and capital into the country. In fact, as these companies that are there, they look at their skyrocketing energy prices, and they say, this is not a good place for us to be. So anyway, just another example, I guess I would say.
So I want to go from the threat, which in this case was a hard attack against the pipelines, to a soft threat and go to Bobby and the Admiral. Was it Caesar's Palace shut down last week due to a cyber attack, and they were having to process registrations on pieces of paper? I think another threat I worry about is the cybersecurity threat to anything energy and grid and water and infrastructure related. Bobby, do you want to talk a little about that? And then Admiral, how much of our protection of those issues rests inside the military versus it's up to all of our commercial enterprises to be adequately protecting?
Thanks, Lil. I'm so glad you raised that, because on one hand, we do have, as the Secretary described, this remarkable turnaround in our fortunes, this incredible opportunity with our growing abundance and the good we can do with it in the world. We have these adversaries, and among their other capabilities are significant cyber capabilities. And as the Colonial Pipeline incident or the Caesar's Palace incident or any number of other incidents with which we're all familiar illustrates, geography doesn't mean so much. So the security of American energy supplies, West Texas these days and other locations, is from a traditional perspective rooted in geography. But when it comes to threats that are cyberspace based, the geography no longer matters as much. And in a way, we're sort of like the biggest glass house on the block. Mm-hmm. We've got the biggest rocks because NSA and Cyber Command are the most capable entities on this planet in this space. But we live in this big glass house, and in our energy production, refining, transmission, all the way down to the pump and to the LNG export situations, all of it is very inherently vulnerable on this dimension, and we have lead pacing adversaries who are very much in the space of being able to operate in hostile ways. And so I'll just kind of sketch a way of thinking about it. This is what I share with my students. If we think of the cyber threat as beginning with the proverbial hack, gaining access to some system somewhere, the question that lurks behind it all is, what is it that the adversary may want to accomplish with that? And from the energy perspective, what has it got to do with energy? Sometimes it's espionage. Sometimes it's collection of information. And there's a whole world of threat here because of American energy IP leadership and the ability of adversaries to try to steal that and jump ahead on the value chain. So that's one thing. Then at the other extreme, there's actual use of those accesses to actually disrupt operations, to have a real effect. Whether it's something meant to be kind of non-strategic, but that can have a strategic effect, like shutting down the situation with the Colonial Pipeline, or something in the heat of actual state-to-state conflict that's meant to be out and out destructive at scale, you have that sort of outer boundary, stealing information, destroying things at scale. And in between, the part that's really tricky is all the preparation of the battlefield activity and what we might call holding at risk activity. And by this, I mean circumstances in which it's not that the Russians or the Chinese are actually planning to throw the switch and disrupt things tomorrow, but they're either trying to position themselves so that they could do that and to have that positioning such that we don't know and can't root it out, but it's there when the need arises, or doing it in a way where it is visible and it is known that they have that capability and might have others we're not sure where they are, and thus we're deterred. Maybe not in the cyber domain, but in other domains. Maybe we're deterred diplomatically. Maybe it has spillover effects on what we're willing to do in terms of weapons shipments to allies and friends in need. This is the name of the game in modern adversarial cyber statecraft. And again, we've actually got the biggest rocks ourselves. But the vulnerability, the fragility of the glass, especially in the energy system, it's not that we're not trying, but it is a wickedly difficult problem, and you're never going to be entirely secure. There's so many layers of vulnerability. So one of the fundamental challenges of our time is how, as a society, we can best align the incentives, the encouragements, the carrots and the sticks, to have all of us investing in ever better, ever more comprehensive security practices, especially in the energy industry. Otherwise, we're at risk of these advantages that Don was describing at a key moment suddenly being taken away from us.
And do you have anything you want to add about where this expertise is and how much of it is the military's responsibility to protect?
If I can, Lolo, let me go back just real quickly to the discussion on soft power, because I want to kind of set a little bit of the board here. You know, when you think back about the Russian invasion, at the time there was great concern about whether the EU and NATO would stick together.
Right.
And it wasn't about whether they would stick together philosophically about the invasion being bad. It was, could they survive a cold winter? Mm-hmm. And there was this huge debate about were they going to be able to get the energy as the Russians cut off the pipelines. And of course, again, back to Don's point here, all of a sudden the Western countries, and the US in particular, managed to shore up the Germans, who there was a real concern about whether or not Germany would hold with the EU. Because again, France had enough nuclear power to be able to get through. Germany had 3 nuclear power plants, of which they had essentially shut all 3 of them down. They started to rebuild those and to put those back online. But could the regasification efforts come quickly enough? Could they fill their stores quickly enough to make it through the cold winter? Well, a couple things happened. One, the winter wasn't as cold, but you began to see a shift in the delivery of natural gas and other fossil fuels to the EU, allowed their stores to come up, allowed the Europeans to get through a cold winter, and that really brought them together to help us, certainly from a soft power and a hard power standpoint, to get us through that very difficult time. Now, again, the statistics I was looking at today, Germany's coffers are kind of filled with gas to make it through the next winter, and this, again, all has to do with the fact that we, the U.S., are energy independent and are in fact, providing energy to our European allies. This is the nature of soft power in a way that we didn't have that advantage before, certainly what you saw in the energy renaissance out in West Texas. To the issue of cyber. So as Bobby said, when you think of the National Security Agency and you think of cybercom, I can tell you candidly, there's nobody better in the world than that. Than those guys and gals that do that work. But I do think we have to be a little bit careful about thinking through cyber in terms of it being kind of the game changer in hard power, soft power. When you take a look at what's happening in Ukraine and the brutality of the war that is occurring, cyber is important, but it isn't the end-all be-all. It's not going to change the fundamental dynamics of war on the ground in Ukraine. It's something we need to be concerned about. We are being attacked 1 million times a day, but I think we've got a good enough system now, certainly within the military, and our relationship with the military's relationship with the civilian sector to provide them, hey, these are the tools that we're using, these are the ways we're looking at cyber and cyber attacks, has strengthened the grid kind of across the board.
Well, I want to ask another soft power question that will touch on China. I think either Don or Senator Hutchison was saying last night that there is a sizable proportion of the world that still does not have reliable electricity, and it's something like 10%. China has had a Belt and Road initiative going for about 5 years, and a large portion of that isn't the roads, it's power plants, it's energy infrastructure, particularly in Africa and Southeast Asia. How are those projects helping China's soft power? Do we care about where they are acquiring that soft power? And as they have hiccups in those projects, does it make us worry less? What can you say about the brick and road projects and their soft power around energy?
Well, that's what the article in the paper addressed this morning, and they've seen a lot of talk about it recently. I was looking at the World Energy Report not too many months ago, and it had 2 charts side by side, and on the left chart was oil and gas reserves in the world, and the United States was number one, at the very top. And part of this energy renaissance has led us to be the very top. Number two was Russia, number three was Saudi Arabia. On the right side was China and having control of the rare earth minerals of the world through this Belts and Roads and through getting resources around the world that they can now claim. But the big part of it is just their processing.
Yes.
They process these. So, you know, do you call they have some soft power because I guess you can call it that. I mean, what you worry about is the fundamental supply chain and what it means on down the road. Nobody knows. I think this is one of the questions that is yet to be answered, but really needs to have serious thought. And that's why I think America's got to take a leadership role in thinking through this in a very thoughtful, orderly kind of way, and not in a political kind of way, where we're just, you know, passing bills and throwing money out to build more windmills. I'm all for more windmills. I'm for all of it. Let's solar all of it. But we've got to think through this in a very thoughtful way. So I think the challenges of America today are really to understand how big a challenge this is and set up on it so that we can think through it with the right minds and the right scientists and engineers and all the rest and work on a solution to this problem. And that's part of it. Part of it is working through it. Well, does China now, they control all the rare earth minerals, where the battery's going to come from? I mean, but I think it's a matter of this country, which is the leader of the free world, has got to take the responsibility to think through this in a very thoughtful kind of way. You talk about 10% of the people, a lot more than that live in the dark. I mean, there are 1.5 billion people that live in the dark. And we've got a world that's going from 8 billion people to 10 billion people. So it's going, more and more energy is going to be required. And so we just got to sit back and understand the magnitude of the problem and go about it in a thoughtful, orderly, common sense kind of way.
Well, and I think that Belt and Road Initiative has got a lot of coal-fired plants as part of it. But Bobby or Admiral, did you have anything you want to say about the developing
Yeah, the thing I'd offer you
power?
on the Belt and Road Initiative is it is twofold. As Don said, part of this is how are they drawing on the critical materials and the rare earth metals that are part of the supply chain. I think as Corby mentioned earlier, I mean, China produces about 70% of the solar modules. They produce about 50% of the mechanisms for the windmills. But the fact of the matter is that what China does not have is they don't have, as we say, a blue water navy. They don't have the ability to sustain a naval force for a long time. The one thing that sets the American military apart is that, as strange as it sounds, we can do underway replenishment at sea. That's a very hard thing to do. It's what our sailors concentrate all the time. So we can keep an aircraft carrier, we can keep a conventional ship that's powered by diesel at sea for a very long time, and I can swear to that. But the Chinese don't have that ability. So what they've done is, by having the Belt and Road Initiative, they're developing ports in Djibouti. They're developing ports all around the world. They are leveraging the Belt and Road Initiative to be able to have access points where they can engage militaries around the world from around the world. So they don't have to sail. They can go to port to port to port.
Right.
As you take a look at the Chinese military today, 2.3 million in the Chinese military relative to about 1.3 in our military. When you think about China in terms of the Pacific, and we think about the United States Navy, we've got 11 carrier battle groups. That sounds like a lot of carrier battle groups. That's an aircraft carrier along with destroyers and cruisers and submarines and an amphibious ready group. But you have to understand Navy math. 11 aircraft carriers means at most we're going to put maybe 1.5 in the Pacific. The Chinese don't have to worry about 11 aircraft carriers. They only have to worry about 1, maybe 2 at any point in time. They are building to 6 aircraft carrier groups, which they will put in the Pacific to counter us. This is a problem, but from an energy standpoint, they've still got to be able to fuel those things. They still have to be able to replenish them. They still have to be able to do the sorts of things that we do and we have been doing for the last 100 years. So the Belt and Road Initiative, soft power in terms of the supply chain, soft power in terms of the critical materials, hard power in terms of their ability to project power from wherever these ports are around the world.
Secretary Evans, I was wondering, one question for you. We've entered this new world where free trade is sort of a dirty word. We don't talk about that anymore. And that used to be a part of the world's interconnectivity, its economic growth. It kept inflation low. It did a lot of things. And now we've entered this new world where we're moving into blocks. And I think a number of us associate that type of thinking with trade wars can lead to resource conflict, can lead to ultimate conflict. How do you think about our views on trade? You led the Commerce Department and led our thinking in that area. Are we going to reverse that, or have we moved in a new direction that it's going to be hard to get off of?
Well, I hope we reverse it. I'm a free trader. I think we got to open ourselves up to the world. I think we got to communicate with the world. I used to say that trade and commerce leads to relationships with other countries. It leads to mutual understanding. It leads to actually higher productivity, economic growth, higher standards of living for everybody. And I used to, use that kind of line everywhere I went in the world. When I went to China, I would say, look, I'm not here to tell you what to do. I'm going to tell you what works in America. I'm going to tell you that we want to work with you. We would like to be your partner. I think as we become partners, we have a mutual respect for each other. We understand each other. Adam and I were talking about it the other day, that I think it's too bad we're not moving natural gas into China right now. I'm sorry we missed that opportunity. Now, we didn't have that opportunity 20 years ago because we were energy scarce. But now with this energy abundance, it would have been nice for us to be somewhat of an offset to Russia and be moving 300 or 400 or 500 million a day into China. So I'm really worried about that, and I think that's what I said this a little bit last night. I just don't like this kind of isolation protectionism position that I feel some in this country, and it gets back to what I said. American leadership, we're the leader of the free world, and we've got to understand that and embrace that and take it on and lead this free world. And I don't think you do that by closing your borders and shutting down relationships with other countries around the world, trade or whatever. So it's again, as I said, earlier, I just. I'd like to see get the politics out of this. I mean, we really got to, think about this thoughtfully and wisely and smart and understand what we're doing. And I don't think if you really take on the responsibility that we should feel, being the leader of the free world, that means we ought to be communicating with them, we ought to be trading with them, we ought to be figuring out ways to be engaged with them. And it's our responsibility as far as I'm concerned. I remember one of the first meetings I had with Vladimir Putin. He asked me, he said, Mr. Secretary, how has America accomplished so much in only 200 years? And I said to him, well, look, Mr. President, I think it's our freedoms that are grounded in our Constitution. I think it's this free enterprise system that creates this environment for innovation and risk-taking and competition with the world that leads to higher productivity, economic growth, higher quality of life. I've said the people of America are good people. They wake up every morning trying to do the right thing. And I think there is a certain moral code about this country that should make us feel responsible for the lives of others around the world. When you mentioned earlier, the people that are living in the dark. I mean, we got 1.5, 2 billion people living in the dark. They want more energy, is what they want. The number that live in poverty. I mean, so no, Maynard, I'm a free trader, and I hope we start heading back that direction.
But are you optimistic we will?
Well, that's a leadership question.
It is.
And I wish I don't have my crystal ball is not any clearer than anybody else's in this room. But I'm sure hopeful. Look, America is a resilient country. we've been through several world wars, many recessions, a number of depressions. I mean, we're going to get this back on track. I'm optimistic we will, and we'll see.
Well, I'm going to be like a Steve Sarkisian play, and I'm going to have quarterback it over to Bobby to see what he wants to ask. So you can throw it down the field.
Terrific. Okay, I got the ball. I'm Quinn. I got my mullet and everything for this. I would like to know, gentlemen, what your thoughts are on what we've seen recently with the BRICS expansion, with these efforts by our competitors of a more authoritarian bent to start bringing more other nations into their orbit. Is this something that's just diplomatic theater, or is this something that's going to have real legs and enhances the challenge to our free system?
Well, let me kind of start with on the Middle East side of it, just to give you my sense of when we start talking about authoritarian governments. Obviously, this administration did not start off well in dealing particularly with Saudi Arabia and also with the Emirates. I mean, the whole issue of Khashoggi, President Biden came out and really kind of put MBS in the penalty box, and that, again, to some degree, what Secretary Evans said. At the end of the day, there are a lot of people around the world that don't follow our same moral code, don't have our constitution, but you still have to work with them. You still have to find a way to work with them. And in this case, you need to find a way to work with Saudi Arabia. Of course, President Biden goes over there in an attempt to get them to pump a little bit more oil. And as of, I think, this week, between the Saudis and the Russians, they've cut oil production by about 1.3 million barrels a day. You've seen the Saudis kind of reach out to China to build that relationship. So this relationship is hard to manage. Make no mistake about it. But the Saudis are necessary. The Emiratis are necessary. Of course, we're now reaching out to Iran. We have we're trying to restart the JCPOA, and as part of that, we've had these informal discussions with Iran. Iran's producing now, I think, 3.1 million barrels a day, which is the highest since 2018. Now, there are a lot of people who aren't real happy with that we are talking to, whether it's informally or not, to Iran. But this is kind of the nature of geopolitics. It is messy, it is ugly. What you have to do is you have to hold the line in certain areas. I couldn't agree more with Don in terms of China. I've said it before, look, the world needs China. Now, we need to hold China accountable for the Uyghurs. We need to hold them accountable for Hong Kong. We need to hold them accountable when they violate the WTO. We need to hold them accountable when they build military installations in places they're not supposed to. But at the same time, we need to find a way to deal with China. We need to talk to them about trade. We need to talk to them about anything, energy. But we've got to engage with them. I was talking to a senior member in the White House several months ago who said, this was before we began these kind of spate of visits, that we were talking more with the Russians than we were with the Chinese. Well, that's no way to do business. You cannot do that and expect that we're going to maintain, the kind of oil prices we're hoping for and the kind of gas prices we're hoping for, and again, to help the people in the world that really need it. So, as I think about the nature of the Middle East, again, to the administration's credit, I think they're starting to get their sea legs under them. They have in China, of course, Janet Yellen's gone over, Tony Blinken's gone over, Gina Raimondo's gone over, so they are trying to build that relationship back. They are trying in the Middle East with the Saudis. It is a little bit more challenging in light of the fact that, frankly, between Mohammed bin Salman and the president, it's just become personal. And when it becomes personal, it is just more difficult because you're not working at a diplomatic level. You're working at a mano a mano, you embarrass me level, and that is a little bit harder to work right now. When you take a look at you take a look at India, I think of India and Mexico and Brazil. I mean, they are still, I don't say violating the sanctions, but they're still dealing with Russia. They're still getting Russian oil. They're still getting Russian fertilizer. They're still getting Russian wheat. They're managing to work their way around some of the sanctions. And again, this just props up Russia more than necessary. How do we continue to engage with Modi? How do we continue to engage with Mexico in a way that allows us to use our soft power, use our hard power where necessary to shape the world for the better? We're struggling a little bit in that area. It's not easy. And again, I'm not not implying that this is something that anybody could come in and do. It's hard to do, but we need to be able to do that.
Yeah, look, I can't add much to that. I agree with everything the Admiral said, and I just would remind people, when we were 50 years scarce of energy, our energy policy was peace in the Middle East. Yeah. Communicating with them, keeping that stable over there, make sure that oil continues to flow to the markets. That required engagement, that required understanding how to deal with them. You can't go over there and tell them how to do it. You can tell them how it works in America. And when I spent a lot of time in China, and I mean, we communicated with them a lot. Now, I know Xi Jinping's different. I got that. I know him. I had a number of visits and conversations with him. But still, you know, you can sit down and talk to him, and there's no reason that we shouldn't be trying to continue to engage them. And I think it's, again, this kind of mentality of moving away from free trade and engaging other countries. I mean, you got to stay after it, and you just got to continue to keep the communication lines open and let them get the feel that, hey, we're here to listen, and we're here to work with you, and here to help you. And I remember that, you know, when I first went to Washington, I went across the street to the World Bank, and I sat down with President Wilkerson, who was there, and he said, Mr. Secretary, thanks for coming, and let me tell you about the world. At that time, 6 billion people on the planet, and 3 billion of them living on less than $2 a day. And I said, you know, that's not a world that we should accept. There is something, responsibility America has to do something about it. I would go around the world and I would say that there's too much poverty in the world and not enough opportunity, too much despair and not enough hope. And it is our responsibility to do something about it if we're going to lead the free world. And that's the attitude you got to take and share with others. And if you do, you begin to build some kind of trust with them, some kind of relationship. And I just don't see us doing it. The whole BRIC thing, I mean, yeah, we got these other countries coming together, and the last thing we can do when we're energy abundant, all of a sudden be this arrogant country, well, we don't need you anymore. We need them all, and we got to continue to lead. So,
Secretary Adams, do you think when you pause on some of this that our own energy independence has allowed us the luxury of not paying as much attention to the Middle East? It's allowed us the luxury of thinking about some energy solutions that may not make economic and national security sense. Do you think in a weird way we're taking our energy independence for granted, and it's one of the reasons why we're not out there engaged and focused like we should be?
Well, I hope not, but it's a good question. Yeah. Because it is different. I mean, we all of a sudden don't have to worry about it. We're energy abundant. We've got plenty. Permian Basin, largest secure supply of energy in the world. I mean, it's totally amazing. But you know, I hope that's not why we're not engaging as much as we were in years gone by.
I would say I agree. I would hope that's not why, but I'm not sure it's not.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we pulled out of the Middle East. You know, pulled out of the Middle East. We've reduced our presence in the Middle East, but our presence in the Middle East wasn't always about oil. I mean, there's this sense that, hey, we did everything because of oil. No, it's because the Middle East had a strategic importance for a lot of different reasons. But nonetheless, you know, our footprint in the Middle East, certainly after Iraq and Afghanistan, has gone down dramatically, and therefore our ability to influence. Back to, you know, Secretary Evans' point, you know, as the leader of the free world, we need to be places. We need to be there to show the flag. We need to be there with more hard power, with more soft power, with more diplomacy. You know, and people say, well, you know, we can't be the world's policeman. Well, the hell we can't.
Right.
Yeah, we can be.
Right.
You know, and yes, that requires a fair amount of money. The Department of Defense budget for, I think, 2024 is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of, you know, $860 billion. Most of that, of course, is focused on the near-peer competitor, China, but it will build more ships. It will put us in a position to put the U.S. flag in more places. But we need to get our diplomats out there. We need to get, oh, by the way, well, I get off my soapbox about Tommy Tuberville and approving. But the fact of the matter is we need people out there showing the flag, and we need not to pull out of places that are strategically important for a lot of reasons, Middle East being one of them.
We need more programs in leadership like PEPFAR. I don't know how many of you know the PEPFAR program, but it's the President's Emergency Plan for AIDS Relief. And President Bush in 2003 looked at China. I was asking about pandemics last night. It wasn't that pandemic, but about pandemics. He saw that pandemic. We shouldn't allow that. That's not America. We need to fix that. And so what he did, he put a plan in place. He put money out there. 20 years later, 25 million lives have been saved. I mean, that's the kind of leadership that needs to come out of the United States. So the United States is sending the message, we care about you. When I went around the world talking about too much poverty, not enough hope, too much despair, not enough opportunity, people would come up to me, well, y'all really care, don't you? Well, we do, and we should. And so that's leadership. That's American kind of leadership. And that sends a positive message, not to just the people in Africa, but people around the world. Marshall Plan, where's that kind of thinking? I mean, it's amazing what this country has done over the last number of years, and we need to continue to lead.
Admiral McRaven, I was curious, Dean Mills was, in your introduction, she was talking about some of the amazing things you've been a part of in your career, capturing Saddam Hussein, all of those great things. And we've also, the other thing we've sort of started taking for granted is the American military. For such a long time, it's been a dominant military. Are we prepared? We stumbled in Afghanistan in the pullout. Is the military prepared? What do you hear and feel from your military experience and friends about the military's ability to do all that's going to be asked of it potentially in the next decade? How are you feeling about that?
Yeah, I mean, I was actually just down in Tampa a couple days ago talking to U.S. Special Operations Command folks, and everywhere I go, I mean, rest assured, we have the finest military in the world. Nobody is even close, not even close. And the quality of the young men and women coming in are better today than they have ever been. And now, we have a shortage on our recruitment side. A lot of that is systemic. It has to do with the fact that COVID wouldn't allow the recruiters to get into the high schools, which is the pipeline for most of our recruiting. The economy is good. There's some structural issues that we're working through. But certainly, as we continue, as we've kind of drawn down from Iraq and Afghanistan, and we are looking at, again, this near-peer competitor, read China, the military is very focused on the technology, the systems, the fuel supplies, all the sorts of things that are going to allow us to project power wherever we need to, particularly in the Pacific. But in terms of the quality of the young men and women, I have said it certainly here on this stage a number of times. I'm the biggest fan of the millennials and the Gen Zs and the Gen X that you'll ever meet. And people talk about this narrative that they are these, soft, entitled little snowflakes. And then I'm always quick to point out, well, then you've never seen them in a firefight in Afghanistan or going to school here at the University of Texas to make a better life for themselves. These are great young men and women, and I have the same kind of optimism that Secretary Evans has. I mean, the fact of the matter is, yeah, we've been through some rough times. Yeah, we're going through some rough times now. We're going to be fine. We're going to be fine because I think this generation of young men and women will pull us out of it, and we'll be better off as a result of their efforts. But in terms of the military, do we need more ships? The military is always going to tell you, well, we don't have the capability we need to engage multiple wars simultaneously. If we have to talk about a war on the European continent, that's a lot different than war in the Pacific. War in the European continent would be a large armed force, the Army, Marine Corps, et cetera. War in the Pacific is naval and air force predominantly. And they're all fighting over resources. But nothing about that's changed since George Washington's time. So,
That's funny.
Well,
Let me say one other thing. I love talking about American leadership, especially when I'm sitting on the stage of one of the great leaders in the history of the American military. So, Admiral, thank you.
Well, I'm very excited that Captain Levine and the ROTC unit here on campus is partnering with our Center for Leadership and Ethics for a national leadership conference this spring. So if you know people in your orbit that would like to come, we're looking forward to being a co-host for that event. We are winding down, and Bobby and I say we know when class is almost over because people start rustling. I think we should give our, particularly Don and William, our Admiral, a big round of applause.
Thank you.
And let Maynard